Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this session titled Resolving Trust Tensions in FinTech. We're joined by some amazing guests today. We have Amrita from MasterCard, who's head of FinTech, who focuses on strategic partnerships around the ecosystem. We have Matt, CCO from Yaply. Yaply enable innovative companies to create better and fairer financial services for everyone through the power of open finance. We have my colleague, Jawad, who's the Global Managing Director of FinTech at Star. Star are a global team of product creators who deliver digital products and services to market. And myself, Ed Adamson, I'm Director of Strategy and Insights at Star. I'll be leading the guys through this discussion for the next 30 minutes. I should say, please add any questions or comments into the feed and we'll endeavor to answer them as we go or respond after. So yes, for the next 30 minutes, we want to talk about resolving trust tensions in FinTech. I'm going to share a few slides we're going to use as a framework. But first of all, why are we talking about trust? Why is trust high in the agenda for people and providers? If you look at some of the statistics that are out there, Propeller Insights, for example, reported that 51% of UK consumers feel digital banks are a riskier place to store money than traditional banks, with 41% of those people limiting the amount of money they would store in them. A CEO perspective, so the CEO of Yolt said he's not focusing on money yet, he's focusing on trust, because 23% of respondents on a recent survey they did thought that open banking was the ability to take a customer's data without consent. So even though the technology might be trustworthy, the perception may be different. And then from a cost perspective, we know there's high costs for things like financial crime compliance. A recent report said that $180 billion was spent globally to limit this challenge of threat of fraud and financial insecurity. So with things like KYC costing £10 to £100 per check, it's in providers' interests to resolve these. And with a high cost challenge comes the trust challenge with that. So clearly the trust equation works both ways. And that's where we will start. The trust equation in FinTech is a two-way street. Let me quickly show you a framework that we'll discuss. So we actually think that trust is a cyclical contract fueled by the exchange of data. So on one hand, on one side, at a very high level, you have people, and on the other side, you have providers. So people may ask, well, how do I know that you'll manage my hard-earned money well? And a provider may ask, well, how do we confirm who you are and what you need? They may then also ask, well, if you give us access to your data and assets, then we will give you added value and personalized benefits, which then people may ask, well, how do I know? And so on. And the more the relationship develops, the more data is shared, the deeper that relationship and easier that trust cycle can become. So, Amrita, if I come to you first, how does MasterCard fit into this cycle or this equation? And does this resonate from an ecosystem perspective with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So at MasterCard, obviously we believe we're at the heart of the ecosystem, right? Especially the payment ecosystem. And with that role and our mandate of making sure that payment is available across the board, it's easy, secure. Our kind of vision is that all stakeholders should come together and build something that's inclusive, build something that's innovative, and build something that's trustful, right? So trust is actually one of the key pillars when we think about our role. And then I think, especially more and more, what we trust is very closely related to data and how we build trust in everyday interaction and as people. That's kind of our view. It's very much to the core of our ethos and building on the ecosystem.
Great. And Matt, as a B2B company and an API provider, if you like, How do you contribute to this equation? How do you ensure your APIs are fit for purpose for your customers, those businesses, and also for the end users?
Great question, Ed. So I think it's around how do we enable the consumer or the business, who's the end user, to have confidence that whatever they're sharing is the right type of data. But equally, if they want to stop sharing that data at any point, they can revoke that consent. So in the open banking framework, it's very much that concept of being able to revoke consent and actually giving consent for what someone's asking for. So if you're applying for a loan, that's a different type of consent that you might give to someone. I want to see your data today to give you a loan. Versus if you're taking a PFM or a wealth management service, where actually someone wants to see your data over a longer period of time so they can give you insight and personalized advice, kind of at the bottom of that circle that you have there. So I think from our side, it's about building an API that has that capability for our customers so that they can provide that service to their end users, whether that's a business or whether that's a consumer. So they can actually have that concept of consent and they can actually be clear about what they're giving consent for when they're doing that, whether it's a payment, whether it's applying for a loan, whether it's a PFM solution, or whether it's one of the whole new use cases that we start to see spring up in the ecosystem.
Right, so it's about how the end users, so your products match the end user use case, that it's fit for purpose, and they have that consent in there. Brilliant. And Jawad, from your perspective, I know we at Star we're working in lots of different types of fintech and across sectors. Is this a new thing, or are we seeing this across the board?
Certainly, it is across the board, and I have seen some examples where such tensions were effectively addressed, or at least were close to be addressed. Customer trust for the energy providers is very thin. We all know, and especially when an unexpected high bill arrives in the middle of a winter, customer don't really trust the provider, and this is where the tension arrives. There was one survey led by Accenture some time ago, and they showed that customers spend just under 8 minutes per year interacting with their energy provider or utility provider digitally. And this creates this widens this trust tension more between provider and the consumer. So one particular company and platform is Silicon Valley based. They try and they pioneered this methodology where they can actually increase the customer engagement, and by increasing customer digital engagements, they actually increase trust as well. And how they did it, they use the customer data they had with them and provide them personalized and useful insights to the end customer to save them more energy, help them with the bill, and above all, reduces bill shock, which there was a main problem for customer to not trust the consumer. Another example I can think of, it's Tesco Club Card. I think they started piloting back in 1994. And what was amazing, like in first 3 months of the piloting the Tesco Club Card, the Club Card pilot found out about the customer more in 3 months than 30 years of retail on the till itself. So how the customer buying, what's the customer behavior, what's the shopper is buying when they're buying. And there's no coincidence for this program to work. The program delivered a personalized and value to the shoppers, using their data and servicing their insights to help them buy better, buy effectively, and saving them the money. And I think this is the equation where you use the customer data and be responsible for this and actually provide something back in return, so they can trust you, they can see the value for them, and then they give you more data in order to get better at it. And I think that this leads to the question comes, like data itself, it has the unlimited potential for both for the providers and for the consumer. With the right usage and with the responsible use on data from either side, the provider, the fintechs or the banks can create the more targeted and personalized services and products for the end users. And by doing so, the scalability comes as well for the both sides. I think at Star, we work with our clients and we try to tackle the same issues across all the sector, not only the financial services. In other sector, we try to help our clients with the same challenge. And one hypothesis we are testing is how a design can elevate the customer experience and improving the customer trust in the provider. And this is across sector, like in financial services and insurance, using multiple technologies like open banking, digital ID, and multiple way of payments.
Great. Wow. And Amrita, you mentioned, you're central to that equation. You mentioned the principles of being inclusive and innovative. So obviously Joad's talking about other sectors, but that level of innovation that you talk about, can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think some of the things that you mentioned about is core, right, when you're building this ecosystem out. And I think you mentioned, the importance of having the customer get value out of the data that they're providing. And it's very interesting because actually MasterCard, we did a survey and we found out that, in fact, if there is transparency, right, upfront in terms of what their data is going to be utilized for, people were 90% more likely to be able to feel comfortable about sharing data. And like obviously this varies by country and it varies by, by age group and things like that, but that's kind of a high level. They are more likely to use a company that is transparent about how it uses it, right? So there is a value, and then there is that communication or awareness of how, and that also adds to the equation of this trust, right? So building on that, when you think about innovation, obviously at MasterCard, there is the digital identity space where this question really comes a lot for us, right? Digital identity, like how do we create that trust? Very much on that. And then of course we have our colleagues at Yapily, obviously when we talk about open banking, so early in their stages. Both of these things, how data transacts and how we control data and how we create that trust becomes more and more important. And so from our side, one of the ethos that we have is, at the end of the day, the user, right, is when it comes to data, the user is the one who owns it, who should be the one to control it, who should be the one to benefit from it. And us as the ecosystem provider or the ecosystem, our role is to protect it, right? So that's kind of how we view, and all, whether we're designing a new product, pushing a new product, that is kind of the central theme in our innovation agenda as we work with masses.
Brilliant. Great. I'm going to dive in a bit deeper. You started going a level down there into values, communication, transparency. So I'm going to skip on to the next part, which is the point around tackling these tensions. Obviously, with any equation or relationships, you're going to have tensions. So tackling trust tensions is key to delivering value for both sides of the equation, right? And, Matt talked about consent, Jawad and you, Amrita, have talked about value add. So if we just dive a bit deeper in what that might look like, we from our experience and talking to people and research, we kind of bucketed 4 pillars, if you like, of trust. I'm just going to quickly run through them. On reassurance, on one hand, if you have from a user perspective, I must have that control you mentioned. This, I guess, is where the consent comes in, Matt, right? Control and added value in exchange for my data. But on the other side, from a provider, it's how can we harness more data and be transparent and secure? So there's this tension on reassurance that's we play, which leads to responsibility. So help me demonstrate my eligibility and authenticity for the product. I'm good. I'm a good guy. But then on the other side, how do we ensure people understand the implications of their decisions? How do we know who they are, even going back to those statistics at the start? Then, of course, data and trust has a personal aspect. You've got my data, have empathy for me and my unique needs. Personalize it. But then the challenge from a provider is, but how can we personalize added value but limit complexity? And then finally, wrapping all that into seamlessness. We know people desire a simple and intuitive, friction-free experience. That's the bar they get from other digital experiences or the digital providers. And on the provider side, it's how can we be consistently high quality, but also efficient? Now, they're just examples of how those tensions might play out. But you know, from your guys' perspective, maybe Matt, if we go back to you, like how, which of these particularly resonates with you, perhaps, or is there a high demand for? Is there anyone in particular you can pull out that you prioritize or add?
I think it's different between a business user and a consumer.
Yeah.
Businesses that are less tied to their personal data, they're more about what business problem can you solve for me. Let's use the example of like something like Intuit QuickBooks or Xero, something like that. You want to aggregate, you're happy to aggregate your accounts because it allows you to reconcile your invoices. I think the trust gap there is it's not really much of a gap. It's a clear, this helps me solve a business problem. It's my transactional data for my business. It's not like what I'm going and spending on my own personal money on. So people are more likely to use that than they may be to use a PFM, where the return for them is not maybe quite so clear. So I think it comes back to kind of what Jared said about the piece with Tesco and kind of what's the give for get. So if I'm giving you this data, what am I getting back? You're either solving a business problem, or in a consumer world, you're either saving me money or you're helping me invest better or more effectively. Or equally, like a lot of this is about the data piece. So I think on your piece there, probably the first one is the first that comes in, but lots of people try to jump straight to the seamless piece.
Yeah.
I think open banking allows that with kind of the smooth app-to-app journeys that you can see. So you immediately jump to the seamless piece. But actually asking someone to share their data as the first engagement they're going to have with you is maybe tricky, unless it's a clear return on investment they're going to get from doing so. Actually going through like an open banking payment journey is a much easier entry into this. So kind of, if you talk about your four pieces here, you're not asking to share data, you're just making a payment, which is the same as if you're putting your credit card number into a website to make a payment. So it's the same piece there, but actually that gets you used to that data flow and that consent journey that you go through. So then, like at Yaply, we very much see for our customers that they want to go with payments first, especially if they're a wealth manager. If we take an example of someone like Money Farm, they've deployed open banking payments for people to top up their investment accounts. After 2 months, they're already seeing 80, 90% of the transactions coming through and now on open banking payment. They've yet to kind of roll out the data side of that. Can you show me your transactions from your spent your main current account or your savings accounts? Because they actually just want to get the money in to ease that consumer use of that product. So like, and that's a good example, I think, of what are you asking someone to do first? Are you asking is the first thing you're saying is, show me your transaction history from the last 5 years? There might be quite a bit of resistance to that. If the first thing you're saying is, can you make a payment, that rather than doing it by credit card or doing it by bank transfer, because it's easier for you and it's easier for us, the bar to entry is much lower.
So it's like the order of the conversation you have with them.
Yeah.
You know, make it easy for them to get on board rather than asking for everything all at once. Almost, I think is what you said. Yeah. And Rita, does that resonate with you, or if you know, do any of these stand out from your perspective?
No, I absolutely. Like, I think there's nothing that I can disagree with there. And I think what's coming out, especially hearing you and Java talk about these examples, is really, you know, data is the new currency, right? And given that data is the new currency, then it's like, okay, how do I make sure we do it in a responsible way? And that's kind of where, like, as you said, right, it's not just about give me all your data so I can give you the best experience. It's about taking that journey and build that trust and build that and have that accountability on the other end, right? So that obviously resonates very strongly. When we look at this tension, as you call it, between users, we have something similar. We call it the data responsibility, but security, transparency, and control, putting the user at the heart of it. And I think as I look across the four that you have, to me, I think seamlessness comes just as important as reassurance. You know what I mean? Like, we find that kind of coming back and forth in some sense, especially when we look at the open banking space, right? So yes, we all banking and discussing about open banking. I think back, right? It's still so early. There's still new use cases coming in. we totally obviously believe that that is the way of the future. But I think it's, having said that, that is also why we need to kind of get it right now, right? Like if we fix the core of these issues and this build the structure and have it in the part of the process and in the part of the infrastructure, I think then we can really sell and go forward. And I think those are some of the things that are coming out to us that, at least from a MasterCard perspective and from what I see with fintechs, that's kind of the key. Building it, having it in the design, having it in the infrastructure, having it as a part of your guiding principles, that we set it straight. And
right. So it's not it's from the very outset, the way you act, the way you create your products, a principled approach rather than a responsibility of doing it. It's simply the way things are done and putting it central to all your decisions. And do you, like, looking around the ecosystem, do you find this is people embracing that, or do you find it still there's a job to be done here?
I think, similar to what Matt said, right? People are jumping onto the seamlessness, which they then equate to slick UX, right? Like that's kind of the jumping off point. And there is some work to be done, I think, in terms of awareness, right? What exactly are we achieving? More clear. We tend to throw a lot of technical jargon, and sometimes those basics get lost. And then when the basics get lost and it's too complicated, then the trust goes. Right? So it all kind of has that loop back effect, if you will. So when we look at the ecosystem players, I think most of them, I think the selling point, they very much hammer onto, oh, this is how great, this is how seamless it is. I think they do recognize, most of them, at least by the time they come to us, like they do recognize the importance of how they show their data and how we share the data. And obviously, we are very particular when we sign commercials, right? Any partnership, any endorsement that we do, we have a very strict diligence process in making sure that they have a very strong and principled.
I think just to jump in on that, it's really like, this is an open finance event. So let's look at the way you share your data. Open banking is a safe, secure method. You don't share your login details. You don't have to go to a screen, put in your username, your password, your mother's maiden name, all that kind of stuff. So as open banking morphs into open finance, I think it's really important that new providers, whether they're pension providers, whether they're wealth advisors, whether it's insurance, I think having that kind of security built into your flow and not allowing like the legacy methods of like screen scraping, reverse engineering, or any of those ways that kind of get your login details, that's the consumer risk. So like open banking secures that. So if someone goes and connects their Barclays account via our platform, we never see that username. We never see any of that. They pick Barclays, they're taken to the Barclays app, and then they log in biometrically there. So it's just, it kind of playing back to your reassurance, but also your seamless thing, as Amrita said. I think those pieces combined, so as we talk about open finance and what the ecosystem can do, I think it's critical that we have that kind of clear flow, but also that secure flow, and that we don't use any of those kind of less secure methods for being able to get more consumer data into providers' hands that actually gives that consumer or that business user more value at the back end. I think it's really important that we look at how that data is got and the security that sits around that flow.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The quote I gave at the start from Yolt, which I realize is a PFM, but from a designer perspective or a user perspective, Matt, how do you, knowing that is the case, and you're not giving over your secrets, you're giving, you're making, actually just then taking on a much more seamless journey with a limited amount of data. How do businesses cope with that then? Amrita mentioned things like transparency and the fact that this has to be seamless. So I guess communicating that that's the case is, whose responsibility is that it isn't, you're not giving away your deep data secrets?
I think it's the provider's responsibility. So in the case of Yolt, I think it's being crystal clear to the user, what do you want to use that data for? What do they get from it? Don't ask for things like data rights so that you can try and sell that data or anything like that. Just be clear about what the actual ask is. Like, we want to give you better advice with a small a, so not the regulated piece of like, you show us your transactions, we can give you some visibility on what you're spending that money on, and we can potentially give you some guidance as to how you could maybe do that better and improve your financial health. Like, what are your goals? This is how we'll help you using your data. So I think it's kind of trying to be clear in simple terms rather than having kind of 100 lines of small font terms and conditions. Much more, what do we want to use data for, and how does it help you as a user?
Yeah.
And can I just add one little, agree to everything you're saying, Matt, just one additional thing is, as we build on this, right, how do you put the end user in control of the data? I think if we can, find that pivot, so it's not just our responsibility, but also giving them control, and then that kind of balances the relationship. It's not just one of take and so I think absolutely everything you said, I'll just add that additional measure of building technology.
And I think one point to add in my perspective is that it's great, like Matt said, it's clear the consent form of what user is signing it for, but also in the same form, what is included, what is not included. So if this data will be used for this, and this data will not be used for anything else. So if you really provide this clarity in an easy form in a Tableau form, then you build more trust because you exactly know what is they're agreeing for. And every time you're spot on, the control on data is really important. I was working and talking to a partner and clients who are providing the data accessibility within the corporate company. So if one corporate enterprise give access to the data to another enterprise, then they have this right to revoke back. It's a company called Harbor, and this is very powerful tool to have. Like, imagine like if we can revoke this right to any other company who use our data to build some service, and after 1 month, you know what, I'm happy now, I want data back. And this easy to use tool would be another enhancement there. And on your pillars, I agree that the data is a new currency, like Amrita said. I think if I put them in an order, I think the responsible would go as number one, because if you put your responsible in the priority one, followed by personal, followed by ratio, and then seamless will come naturally. Because what happening now, what we're seeing in the market, people try to make very fancy user interfaces, and they think this is a seamless experience. This experience only works when you have built everything else in place. You have a responsibility, you have a reassurance, you create personalization, and then the seamlessness comes as the end product. Rather try to create your user interfaces fancy with a lot of no offense to design, but if you invest too much in design but don't do other pillars, then your seamless doesn't really work.
Yeah, no, I hear you, Jawad. There's you've got to, the substance has to be there before you make it look beautiful, right? If I was to simplify it, but that kind of links me with the last remaining minutes. Okay, Jawad, if we follow your thread there, responsibility may be the first. Amrita talked about transparency and being principled about how you do that, and then the seamlessness is, Matt was talking about is important in terms of doing the basics right. Creating the awareness of what in clear and simple terms, I think you said, Matt, so that they know what kind of control they have as an end user. But fundamentally, what I'm hearing is, right at the start, everyone's talked about this. Well, Matt talked about the consent journey. So make sure people understand the value of the equation. Make sure they understand what they're going to get, what the added value service is, what the benefit is, and that therefore your data collection is fit for the purpose of that, and that you're balancing this out for people clearly. Matt, is that a fair summary? You got any final points or clarifications on that, or any parting words of wisdom for the audience in terms of how to resolve these tensions?
I think that's a fair summary. I think it's just critical to kind of leverage on what my other panelists said. Place the consumer or that end user at the heart of when you're designing your product. Place them at the heart of it around how you're going to use their data and how you're going to give them value, and you'll get much higher adoption than if you worry about it as kind of the back end. And you,
Amrita, any parting words of wisdom based on that?
No, I think, Matt, you literally took the words out of my mouth, right? Putting the end user back in control, right? Giving them as much control by design. And I think that's what will create the trust, and that's kind of what will keep the trust in the ecosystem. And then we can have all of these new technologies really scale up and broaden and make our lives better. So absolutely agree on that.
And with that, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time, guys. Thanks for your words of wisdom and sharing. I know 30 minutes has flown by, but I hope the audience got as much as I did. All that's left for me to say is please stay with us on the main stage for the next fireside chat, which will be looking at the age of the digital builder. Thank you all.
Thanks.